me see. I'm just double checking the system. If we are live, looks like we are live. Let me do this. Okay. Good evening. This is Yoftahe Gebru from the Yoftahe Show. Today I have a special guest, Superintendent Elow, to discuss about law enforcement and the current situation that's happening. So once again, I want to say hello to everyone. Just double checking that we are live. We are live. Today is going to be a very sensitive moment, like for all of us that we have gone through. We're going to try to address as many questions, as tough questions as we can. Just this moment, I just want to make sure to take a time to say to Floyd's family, may you rest in peace. We feel your pain. We understand your pain. So we are all here. I didn't know you, but you have brought all of us together. So for the family of Floyd and for all of those who've been affected by the horrible videos that we all have watched, I want to say I'm sorry. So I want to go back to Superintendent Christine Elow. I want to say thank you very much for taking this time, especially during this difficult time. I know how busy you are with everything that's happening. So I want to welcome you. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and we will get started with the show. Thank you again, Superintendent Christine Elow.
Good evening, Yoftahe, and thank you for having me. And please call me Christine. So yes, my name is Christine Elow. I'm a superintendent with the Cambridge Police Department. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So yeah, let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Thank you again. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how did you get started as a police officer? Tell us a little bit about yourself, I guess.
Sure. I grew up in the city of Cambridge. I went through the Cambridge Public Schools. I was a little bit of a lost kid, wasn't really sure what I was going to do after high school, wasn't ready for college. So I, like yourself, I joined the military. I was in the United States Navy for 4 years. And as soon as I went in the first day, I said, this is not for me. So after 4 years, I got out and went back to school, moved back home with my mom in Cambridge. And then, like many working class kids at the time, I took the police civil service exam. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I wanted to find a job that had security. I didn't want to get into a job where I could get fired. I needed a paycheck every single week. And policing just made sense for me at the time. So I went in just really for job security. I didn't have any history of police in my family. A lot of people on the police department, they come from generations of police officers. I'm the first one in my family that was a police officer, I think much to my mother's chagrin, but I think she's okay now. She knows that I'm safe. But yeah, I just kind of happened upon it basically because of my military service. And I've been here for 25 years and I absolutely love it.
Oh, that's good. Just a quick question. It's like, I mean, as a colored officer, as a woman, being in the police officer, is there any hurdle that you have to go more than anybody else? How did you find it? Is there anything that you think like is harder for you than it is for typical male officers? Usually we think, whenever we think about police officers, sometimes we may think as male field.
Yeah, really interesting, Yoftahe. When I first decided to become a police officer, one of the things that kind of guided my kind of moral compass was a conversation that I had with young people. I used to work at the Area 4, now Moses Teen Center in the port area of Cambridge. And there was a young group of African-American males, all, 13, 14 years old. And they found out I was going to become a police officer. And they said to me, Christine, why are you going to become a police officer? And I said, well, why don't you want me to become a police officer? And these young boys said, the police don't like us. The police are mean to us. And we don't like the police. And from then on, what I decided in my own gut is that whenever I engage, particularly with a young male of color, I was going to treat them with respect. I was going to treat them with dignity. And that really guided how I became and how I showed up as a police officer. And I think for many, and this is back in 1995, my approach to policing wasn't really what they expected. I mean, policing back in the early 90s, it was all about arrest as the preferred, method. When you interact with somebody, it's always, can we take them to jail? And my approach was a little bit different. It's how do we help this person? This person obviously is in crisis. And initially that was tough. And people thought I chose the wrong profession. They said to me, Christine, you should have been a social worker and not a police officer. I said, well, I think we're a little bit of both. And over time, I think my argument has won out.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
I lost you. There's something going on here. The phone. Something's going on. There's a phone there.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes, yes.
I got you.
They're going to do the calling to, they have it. So as a police officer, I know as doctors, there is an oath that doctors have to take, and then it says, do no harm. Is there an oath that police officers have to take?
So I did get this oath from the International Association of Chiefs of Police that I will read to you.
Okay.
On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve.
Wow, that says a lot in it. So it's definitely a great oath to take. So if we want to go back to the current situation, have you watched the video of Floyd's murder?
More times than I want to say, yes.
And then when you watched it, how did you feel? What was your reaction?
It was heartbreaking. When I watched that video, I watched it first as a Black woman. I watched it next as a mother of 2 African-American boys. And then I also watched it as a police officer. And with all those different hats that I wear, all 3 of those hats, my heart was broken. I cried. And it just, to hear that man, call out for his mother and plead for a breath, it just brought me back through so many other senseless deaths of African Americans across this country. And, it made me think back. A couple of minutes ago, I said, I love my job. And I'm sure some people are like, well, how can you love this job? And I think it really is the challenge of trying to change it, right? There is so much work that we have to do as communities of color, as people of color, and to really show people that this job is so much more than arresting a bad guy. It is about connecting with your community. It is about having your community represent your police department. So getting other young people, which I hope to do tonight, thinking about as a career as a police officer. That's the way we're eventually going to change policing, is to have it represent our diverse communities.
Thank you. Like I said, that video hit me so hard. I mean, there was a moment I was just frozen that I couldn't think how for 8-9 minutes, someone as a human being could do this kind of criminal act as a police officer. So for me, at that moment, one thing that hit me the most wasn't just about this person murdering someone in front of all of us, but there are 3 other officers allowing for something like this to happen. And for me, a police officer is someone I call when something goes wrong. And then when I call for someone to help me during that moment, but those are the people who are making that horrible act, how does it make you feel as a police officer? This is a person who's degrading the uniform and the oath that you just read to us is doing. How did that make you feel?
Right. And it was the one officer and the 3 officers around him watching that officer. Actually, I think 3 or 2 other officers were also, kneeling on him at the same time. And it was just, I was yelling at the TV, like, somebody push him off. Like, what are you doing? And it was enraging. It was enraging. And I will tell you, the conversations that I have had with officers, really from, across the country, people are like, how do you explain this? And there is no explanation for it. It was criminal, and those officers being charged criminally is everything that should happen. It was disgusting, and still, it hurts my heart tonight.
I'm so happy hearing you say that, because sometimes as civilians, what we are missing is, if I do something in my community or for myself, I should be told, almost dishonored from that community. This person made it even your job even harder than any other criminal that I can think of. So whenever we do see rallies, and then today I attended one of the rallies in Fitchburg, I was happy enough to see the Fitchburg chief come out and say, we're going to do this together. But in some areas, police have not participated part of the march, and it still feels like it. So for me, sometimes that I feel like police should be the ones marching, saying he doesn't represent us. Is there any kind of movement to say, as police officers, this person does not represent me, and we should be the one actually marching out and not the civilians?
You know, it's really interesting that you should say that. My commissioner wrote an op-ed that just talked about we need to do more than words, right? We need some action. And after each senseless death of a young Black or a brown male, we're talking. And the next step, what are the actions that we're taking? So, you know, it's really challenging when you're addressing a national policing nationally. As we talked, as we were prepping for this show, there's 18,000 different police agencies that are all doing things like almost 18,000 different ways. And so I can speak specifically to what we're doing here in Cambridge, but I think the bigger mission is how do we change policing, you know, nationally? And what we really want to do here in the city is develop best practices, hopefully take those best practices statewide. We go and we visit the International Association conference where we talk about some of the incredible work that we're doing as far as reducing arrests, reaching out to young people, reaching out to vulnerable populations, and really saying that it's making a difference. So how do we spread this word to other police departments across the country? And that's really, I think, our next really big mission.
That's good. I'm glad you say that. I mean, I think that's going to take me to the leading question with that. One of the things sometimes that I hear of as civilians, if you see a crime, report it. Or we can say in the gangs or other places, one of the things that says stitches, what is it?
Yeah, snitches get stitches.
Get snitches, something like that. And then there is a feeling at the same time, police officers will always protect their own. They will never bring someone that they see doing bad, because if they do report that person, that means they're going to be left alone. So we are defeating the purpose by saying for the civilians to report a crime, but police officers do not report when they see a crime. So how do we balance that?
And there's a couple of different thoughts that I had hearing you say that, because also in communities of color that don't traditionally trust the police, they are hesitant to call the police when they see a crime occurring, because they don't trust that we're going to come and police for them. You know, the next thing you know, we might be coming, you know, interrogating them or, you know, running them for warrants. How can you trust that we're here for you? And we're really working hard. So there's a couple pieces to that. I think we really have to do a lot of work so that communities of color, immigrant communities, trust that we're here for you, trust that you can use us as a resource, and trust that when we respond, we're going to make the situation better and not worse. One of the things that we say to police officers when we respond to a scene is we never want to leave the person worse off than we encountered them. We want to leave them better off. How do we do that? And right now, I know there are people out there in my community that are fearful of calling the police because they don't know how we're going to respond. And that's concerning. The other piece, as far as when police officers cross the line into criminal behavior, getting police officers to then, you know, stop another police officer or report that police officer. And I will tell you honestly, that is a challenge. I think there is a culture in policing that has always been somewhat, you know, the police against everybody else. You know, the police are out there, they're the only ones, they're the last line of defense. And I don't buy that. And I think that we as police officers really need to make sure that when we go into a scene, if we see an officer losing control of a situation or acting inappropriately, we have a duty and an obligation to step in and stop that behavior. If not, you're going to be held accountable. And we have to make sure, like those officers in Minneapolis, that they are held accountable for being complicit and allowing that officer to nail on Mr. Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes. That is just, we cannot allow that, and officers have to be held accountable.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, it brings me to one of the things, like, I don't even want to call his name, unfortunately, but the person who kneeled for that long on Floyd, the one reason that he was able to stay that long was his hand in his pocket, disregarding everybody telling him not to, he's going to kill him. He was protected by the uniform. If it was a civilian, all those civilians, we would have rushed in and took him out, but they did not move, or they did not push him, just like you said earlier, because he was wearing the uniform, and they thought they're going to be shot if they tried to interfere with the police officer. So is there anything a civilian can do? Like I said, I hope we will never have to see something like this, but is there any kind of rule, a law that the Swiss civilians did not know that they could have interfered to save Floyd?
So, and I wish I looked this up. There is a law that I saw when I was studying for exams way long ago, procedural law, where if you think an officer is acting criminally, right, or depriving somebody and using deadly force, that you can then step in. I think I would caution people from doing that. And I understand in Minneapolis why they didn't, because they could have, got hurt. But, I think for me and at home, I watched this. I have 14-year-old twin boys, and my significant other, we were all watching this. And my significant other kept saying, I would have pushed them. I just would have pushed them off and, let the chips, fall where they may. I think I just would caution civilians from doing that. And I think the best course of action was that videotape from all those different angles. I think you should do everything you can. But then at the same time, I mean, how do you tell somebody not to intervene when you see somebody being unjustly, suffocated? I'm speechless, and I'm not even sure how to respond to that, other than just please use caution, and make sure you have good video cameras. It's really hard to respond appropriately and give appropriate direction.
It's going to be always tough. I mean, we always hope those police officers are going to be able to police themselves during those times, especially after this. I'm hoping there will be some kind of training in place. But what you just said about the video brings me something. Myself, or most of us pretty much, believe racism or this kind of treatment has been happening for a long time, but nobody believed us. This time around, people are believing us and gathering around us because there is a video. There are so many criminals like this that did happen, crimes that have been committed by police officers before, but it was never captured by a video. So we always believed the police officer's word. Right. Is there any system, if there was no video in place, that could have brought this police officer's investigation? Who does do the policing of the police?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways that we do it here in the city. We do have a civilian oversight board called the Police Review and Advisory Board, which is PRAB. It's made up of one person who's hired by the city, and then a board of people who are Cambridge residents, so that you can report if you felt like you were mistreated by the police, you can report it that way. And we also have an internal affairs division that's now being led by a civilian inside. He's an attorney, and he has a crew of investigators. So you can report it through the police department or the Police Review and Advisory Board. I think you can also do it through the state's attorney general. So there's a number of different ways. So we want you, through our website, to report police misconduct or any sort of interaction that you have with a police officer that you just feel uncomfortable about. It doesn't have to be some blatant, act, but if it makes you feel uncomfortable, if it makes you feel belittled, if you felt disrespected, if you felt like your dignity was taken from you, we want to know that, because just really letting people know how you felt during that interaction is the word that we're trying to get to our officers. No, they may not have acted criminal, but do you realize the way that you've acted might have really hurt the legitimacy of the police department just through that action? And how do we strengthen legitimacy? Is by building trust and treating people with respect and dignity. So now I forgot the question.
So, I mean, let me just rephrase it a little bit with that, because my understanding, sometimes if I'm wrong, maybe you can correct me. When we talk about the internal investigation, the IA usually is done by other police officers internally. And we do have this fear that whatever case that they investigate, Even if they find the police officer wrongdoing, they will hide it because they're protecting themselves. They may get a slap on the wrist, or they may be disciplined, or may end up being on a desk job, but the public will never know. So is there an individual, an outside investigation that could happen? Because if I'm policing myself, I'm always going to be biased for myself. So is there an independent investigation that does occur so that police officers don't become biased? I mean, I don't blame them, because they're going to they don't want to be in the same shoes at some point. So they're going to try to be a little bit more lenient to that. Is there an independent part that investigate the police?
Well, there's a couple of different things that I think about. Yes, for us internally, we do have our officers investigating, but those are incidents that are not deemed criminal. If it's a criminal incident, that has to go through the district attorney's office. But there's also, I would say, the Department of Justice. One of the things that happened with us, and I'll go back to, I don't know if you remember the arrest of Henry Louis Gates here in the city. He was a Black Harvard law professor who was arrested standing on his own porch. One of the things that happened after that arrest, and Cambridge has a really good reputation, but the Department of Justice came in. So the federal government came in and they said, we want to see all your books. We want to see the complaints of racial profiling. So we, as a police, we don't just work in a vacuum, right? We work for, a bigger entity, and we keep track of use of force. We keep track of complaints. We keep track of investigations. And let's just say we have one officer that had 6 investigations, all for rude and discourteous, meaning they were talking to somebody in a disrespectful manner. And then 6 times we find them cleared, 6 different complaints. How can that be? How can we say this is a legit, and these are public records, these are legitimate investigations, but you have 6 cleared for the same officer? That's not okay. So we're tracking use of force. We're tracking how many times you've been complained against with rude and discourteous. We track things when you make a disorderly arrest, so discretionary arrests. Who is having a difficult time, defusing, de-escalating a situation, not being able to use their communication skills, and that ends up in an arrest. That's something that we want to flag. We want to flag, who do you pull over? What action do you take when you pull those people over? Is there a pattern? Is there a pattern of women? Is there a pattern of people of color? Is there a pattern of males? What is the pattern? And how do we bring that to your attention so that we can make an informed decision? So we're in the process of building a dashboard. This is the commissioner's baby for racial profiling, where we're going to know real time how our officers are doing. And we're also going to make this dashboard available to the public, so that they can see what the complaints are. I mean, one of the things that I think police departments have to do a better job at is being transparent. Where are your policies and procedures? How many use of force complaints? How many racial profiling complaints? Those are things that if we're saying we're doing a good job, we are transparent and we're building the trust of our community.
I'm glad to hear you say that, but if there are those kind of reporting in place, I don't know, I think it was the person who murdered George Floyd, he had almost 17 or 18 complaints in place, and he was still patrolling the street. So how does something like that get bypassed, and how can someone like that go back to policing the community?
This goes back also to what sort of internal mechanisms you have. We have an early intervention system here in the city of Cambridge, where if you have 3 events that are flagged, and one could be a citizen complaint, one could be, a car accident, but 3 things that go up to the Internal Affairs Division, we're gonna have supervisors watching you a little bit more closely, like saying this officer is having a difficult time. There could be officers that are also having a difficult time at home. So we have to do a really good job of really monitoring our officers and their mental health. So we have a really robust police wellness and peer stress program. We have a police chaplaincy program. So we have just a number of different, employee assistance programs, a number of different programs to help officers who are having a difficult time. We realize this is a stressful job, and sometimes officers work long hours, and we have to make sure that our officers are at their best when they're going out in the street to minimize any sort of harm.
Okay. So why do you think, I mean, I know as a civilian, if I did something wrong, right away, especially with this kind of video, I would be arrested right away. Why did it take so long Now, I don't know, maybe I didn't check the last one. The other three officers still not arrested unless they are arrested. And I don't know about that. I apologize. But for the officer who murdered Floyd, after the whole world watched that video, he was not arrested right away. It took, I think, 4 or 5 days, I think. Why is that?
I watched the Attorney General in Minnesota talk about that, and it really, what it sounded like to me, and I'm just trying to presume here, is that they wanted almost proof beyond a reasonable doubt as opposed to probable cause. Usually when we arrest somebody, the standard of proof is more probable than not. Well, for me, that video, there was enough in there, probable cause, to arrest. So it took them way too long. I think they were looking for an airtight case, which can be problematic. And I think it definitely caused some outrage across the country. I did hear today that the other officers, I'm not sure if they were arrested, but they're all going to be charged, and they upped the murder degree to second degree instead of third.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, so because I wasn't sure about the third degree murder by itself was fair enough, but I'm glad to hear that it was upgraded to second degree. So just general question. I know when I get a job, there is a probation area. Some of the questions that I go through, just a police officer, just because they wear the uniform, let's say simple, let me simplify it. If you liked spaghetti before you became a police officer, after you wear that uniform, you're still gonna like spaghetti. If there is a police officer who's deemed, I don't know, his background, call it racist, calling those kind of things, can pass somehow. Is there any kind of testing or what kind of psychological or background check are being done before a police officer that is being entrusted to protect the public? What do they get? How do they pass through that? Because if they were racist before becoming police officers, they're not going to stop being racist just because they wore the uniform.
Right. And I can tell you from my experience, I did background investigations for a time, and we have not hired people because there were some questionable racist incidents in their past. There was one officer in particular, and I didn't see the tattoo, but we were told that he had a tattoo of a swastika on his body. And then we looked a little deeper, we dug a little deeper, and we found some credible racist incidents that was enough for us to bypass him and not hire him. In today's day of social media, we just had another one where there were some questionable posts on a Facebook page, and we took that and we used that as reasons. You know, they were homophobic and different references that drugs and stuff that said you are not a suitable candidate to be a police officer. So I think it's really incumbent for all police departments to look thoroughly into the backgrounds of potential officers before you hire them. Facebook pages, you know, look through all the different employees. We do extensive background checks on all our police officers.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there any, what I call part of the police training, what's called cultural diversities or sensitivity, how to interact with different cultures, or sometimes in the recruiting system, if you don't have someone, a Black officer, I mean, for me, my experience, I'll tell you, for example, when I joined the military and then I was stationed in one of the station that I was at, they were mainly white people. And one thing they told me after I joined, the conversation changed. They said they used to have a lot of, call it Black jokes that they were telling each other and having fun with it. By me joining, I was able to change that culture a little bit and then be able to explain. So having more Black officers or Hispanic or even Asian officers in the field can balance out the people that don't know or don't interact on a day-to-day basis. Is there any kind of balance trying to do or training for people who have never really been exposed to the other race? What kind of training is in place?
So the short answer for me is not enough in our regional police academies. One of the things that we recently did is we were part of a regional police academy, but didn't really fit our needs. It was out in the suburbs. We police in an urban environment. We have a diverse community with a lot of different social injustice issues. So we moved from that academy just because they weren't teaching about cultural competency. They didn't understand how to police diverse populations, specifically with, homelessness and substance abuse and, all these different issues in the community. So we wanted to go to a police academy that met our needs. And so we've partnered with Northeastern, and we have a whole just new curriculum that does stress cultural competency. We have a piece that we've done on historical trauma. We're doing a lot of training when it comes to integrating communication, assessment, and tactics, which is all about how to de-escalate a situation without using force. So we have, fair and impartial policing, police legitimacy. We, for me, have been in Cambridge, has been on the front lines of really, I think, groundbreaking training with how we change policing moving forward. I really would like to see a lot more around the history of policing, particularly in the African-American community, being taught in the police academies. I think it might give officers some context to the anger, the pain, if you understand trauma, historical trauma, vicarious trauma. And I don't think we know enough about that. So we try hard to teach that here in the city, but it needs to be more on a national level.
Thank you. I think, like you said, it has to be on a national level. Thank you. Cambridge can be the lead on something like this. So with that, what I want to ask, most of the videos that we have seen an armed Black man, especially being shot or being mistreated, is there any kind of fear? I mean, I don't want to say all police officers are bad, because that's the last thing I'm going to say. There are so many good officers, myself personally, that I know. So I honor and I respect. And I definitely, everybody, at the end of the day, the goal should be for everyone to go home safely. So I'll always promote for something like that. But for those people who are in it, is there, whenever they come across a Black person, and then I'll tell you this, my 13-year-old asked me, and it hurt my heart, is, am I safe to be near a police officer? He asked me. Is there any kind of training, or I don't know how to present it, for police officers when they come across a Black man, they already assume that person is dangerous. Right. And instead of escalating or not armed or whatever, so a Black man, by just being a Black man on that moment, can be considered a weapon by itself. Right. Is there anything that can be done? The treatment is fair.
Yeah. Oh boy, you're hitting on. So I actually wrote my thesis on this, and one of the vignettes that I looked at, or one of the cases that I looked at, was the Philando Castile shooting, again, also in Minnesota, Minneapolis, right? And one of the things that I said in that is that the officer, just because he was already afraid, right, approaching this car with this Black man. So he was already afraid. And then when he heard that the Black man was armed and legally armed, the fear just escalated. He couldn't even hear that he was legally armed. He just saw a Black man and a gun. And I think in this country, Blackness, right, has just, and it's just due to systemic racism, right? We have looked at Blacks as threatening from the beginning of time, since slavery, and it has not changed. It's changed a little slightly with how we talk about it, but I still think that when people see, a group of young Black kids, there's immediate fear. So I think one of the things that we've done is just, fair and unbiased policing. Do you recognize that you have biases, and that it's okay to have biases? Being biased does not mean that you're a racist, but it's really critical for officers to understand that, geez, when I see this Black male, I'm a little bit afraid. And if you can admit that to yourself and then keep those biases in check during interactions, you're more likely to have a better outcome. I mean, it terrifies me. And my sons, I have twin sons who are 14, and they ask me, why do the police kill Black people? And I'm like, guys, we have a lot of work to do. And they even asked me, Mom, how can you do this job? And I told them that we need to change it. And that's why I'm here. And I think that's a real fear, and we're working hard to change that.
That's good. Do you think with this, because I'm not sure if Cambridge is mandatory to wear a body cam, is it, or is it something that it should be, because it would protect the police officer, it would protect anything that's happening, because instead of saying hearsay, she say type of thing, the video will not lie. Do you think having a body cam would help at least in some part of telling the truth.
Yeah, I do. And these are conversations that we're having here in the city of Cambridge. There's a lot of privacy rights here in the city, and people want to make sure that we're not overstepping our boundaries. How are these cameras being used? When are they being used? I think that's a conversation that we're having more now. And I know that the police department, police officers would be fine wearing body cameras, and I have heard that it has helped interactions, particularly in Boston. So I think stay tuned. I know we're talking about it.
That's good. Let me see if we have some questions that I can take. So with everything that's happening that right now, what do you think needs to happen nationally or Cambridge specifically it's doing? I know you cannot speak for the whole police force in the United States, but based on what we all saw, what kind of things should be in place, or training, extra training that needs to be in place to rebuild that trust between community and the police force?
Right. Whew. First of all, I think we can't stop talking about it. I think we need to have the honest conversations. I think we need to look at our training. I think we need to look at how we use force. We really revisit everything. It's just, I think about here in the city of Cambridge, although we're doing good, we can still do better. How do we reach? And I think a big thing for me in changing how we police is changing what our police departments look like. And that's where the recruiting piece comes in. I think when you have a diverse police department that represents from all different parts of your community, you're going to be a better police department because you're going to more effectively be able to connect with the different communities that you have in your city or town. So I think diversity is the key. I think as far as recruiting, retention, promoting, a big thing for us is we don't have much diversity in our command ranks and supervisory ranks. I want to see more diversity in those ranks. So I'd like to focus a lot of my attention on the recruiting, hiring, promoting, training. I think that's a big next step for us.
What does a recruiting look like for someone to qualify for a police officer? What is the requirement?
So there's a number. So I want to talk a little bit about recruiting here in the city. We've started recruiting. I was having this conversation as I was prepping for this conversation. We start recruiting literally like in grade school. We want our young people in our grade school to see police officers as mentors, as role models, as people that they can go to for help. So we have police in our schools and getting them interested in the policing field. As soon as you turn 14, you can do something like join the Police Youth Academy, where you get paid to be embedded in the police department to learn all about what it's like to be a police officer. And then we have a cadet program where you're actually now getting paid again, but it's a full-time position with benefits, and it gets you ready for what it's like to be a police officer. So that's something that we do. We're also reaching out. A big thing for us is reaching out to our, communities of color, just to say, this is a great job. And I think for people to be interested in this job, they have to see people that look like them, that represent them. So that is really where having some diversity is absolutely critical. If they can't see themselves in this uniform, they're not going to think about it.
That's good. I think we will talk more about recruiting, how to get involved. There is also an auxiliary police officer program that I definitely, after COVID, I've been talking so many times with Adam and other police officers that I'm going to be joining to make sure that I'm closer to that and understand that. So that'll be something definitely we'll be talking about. With the training that happened, especially right now, what I think, or I could be wrong, but the reason this police officer was emboldened to kill George Floyd in public is because from past experiences, so many officers that have done wrong, have killed in public, never were really brought to court, or they were found not guilty and let go. All they did maybe get fired from their job. And then, so do you think these people, I mean, I know you may not be able to answer for sure. Do you think the person and these people who helped with the death or the murder of George Floyd will be charged and go to prison?
That's my hope. I do know that they are bringing charges against the 4 officers that were there. I think a big part of beginning the healing is for people to be held accountable, for those officers to be held accountable. I think that if those officers are not held accountable, you're going to see a lot more of what we're seeing now and what we've seen over the past week. So I think my big fear is that they're not going to be held accountable, as we've seen in the past, as we've seen with the Philando Castillo. That officer did not serve any jail time, and it's just disgusting to me. So we need to hold our officers accountable when they do wrong.
Okay. What is the conversation usually that happens after this, that as a police officer or the others, I mean, it's hard to tell for all. It's like, not again, why am I in uniform? The frustration, or, I mean, someone's posted and said there has to be more than this. There have to be, even though we're seeing it in clear, a man being murdered, we're always looking, there is some kind of backstory that caused for something to happen. So what is the first reaction or the communication as training as a superintendent for Cambridge? What kind of sensitivity training, or what does the communication look like after a video, something like this shows up?
You know what I noticed with this particular incident, and actually in other high profile incidents where there was some uprisings after it, is that the death of the individual gets lost, and what people end up focusing on is the reaction. And I heard it today with Eric Garner's daughter, who got on and she said, forget about, the protests that are going on. Let's remember the death. And I think people focus and forget, that a man died. It was, as you put it, was murdered, was kneeled on for over 8 minutes, begging for a breath. And that seems to have been lost on some people, and they're only focused on the riots, on the looting, on, the reaction to the death, which for me, in so many ways, I'm not saying that it's okay, but it was a tipping point for so many in communities of color that have felt, powerless for, not just this generation, but for past generations, where we've seen and heard of senseless deaths of unarmed, Black and brown males mostly. So I think the focus just gets lost, and people just want to focus on what they want to focus on. And how do we bring it back to a man who should be alive today is dead because of the actions of a police officer, and keep lifting that up.
Okay. I mean, I know you may not be able to answer this. Another thing that hit me, not only with the death, is because I was in the Army as a medic, as EMTs or whoever came to bring George Floyd and to take him to the ambulance or whatever was in there. The person came in and checked the pulse, and they still carried him and took. In my experience, I would have performed CPR at that moment. Why is it not something like that performed? He was still handcuffed. He was motionless. He was not breathing. He was not treated for me as a person at all. And that part by itself, it hit me, and I don't see that kind of conversation. Everything is focused on that police officer. For me, whoever came in as EMTs or whoever came to take his body did not perform a CPR. They could have saved him there at the moment. If they performed the right CPR, maybe we would be having a different conversation right now. So is there any reason from what you can see that no CPR was performed in place?
There is no reason that I can say that would justify those actions. I saw the same thing that you did. I saw the EMT come over and check the pulse on his neck, and then roll him on a stretcher. And I didn't see any CPR being performed. And I hope that's going to be part of the investigation. And I hope that's going to be part of, the final report that comes out for police departments about, what are you doing? How could we have done this better? How could we have avoided this? Could we have, to your point, brought Mr. Floyd back to life if we had performed CPR?
Yeah. I mean, for me, and like I said, not only the police officers, those EMT didn't have the right training, or they just wanted to pick up a body that they didn't think human and go away. I mean, they need to be fired. They need to be trained. I don't know what to say, but CPR performed right there, that he should have been handcuffed, and they should have performed the CPR to try to revive this person. And it just, I said, they already deemed him dead, and I still don't believe it. He died on scene, not at the hospital. So that brings me to another question. The coroner says, came up and said he died because of some other medical reasons, and the family had to do an independent investigation to come out and tell us what we all saw. So this hiding, it does expand when we talk about systemic racism or hiding. It doesn't just involve from the police. We see it in the EMT, and then now we see it as a medical examiner coming and telling us we all fools or we didn't see what we saw. How is it possible a medical examiner can come and tell us we all didn't see what we saw?
And literally, I think that reaction just infuriated people. They were looking to, and it's almost like blaming the victim, right? As we've seen in so many cases with a death. And I've seen it more with like domestic violence cases and sometimes sexual assault cases where, well, if she wasn't wearing that skirt, nothing would have happened. So to look for something other than this man would be alive today if it wasn't for this officer's knee on his neck. I don't want to hear that he might have had an underlying heart condition. I don't want to hear that he might have been under the influence of intoxicants. I don't care. He would be alive today if it wasn't for that knee on his neck. So I think that just makes people more angry. And as you pointed out, it highlights the racism in this country.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I guess we have a lot of ways to go. What do I say to my son who said, I'm afraid of police officers? I could tell him like there are 10,000 police officers, million police officers that are really good, who will never do something like this. But I don't know how to have that conversation after he watched that video. I was trying to protect him as much as I can, but with YouTube and everything that's going on, he watched it and he's saying, as a Black kid, he's afraid. So what do you think that conversation should be with my son?
I would tell you again, as a mother, I'm afraid. My son, who is 14, was out. He's African-American, brown skin. He was out today on his bike, and I couldn't get him on the phone. And, one of the things, the conversations that I have with them is when they will talk to me, actually, and I fear, I'm waiting for the day when he has that interaction with an officer that makes him feel less than. And I think as parents, what we need to do is just let our children know that you have advocates for you, that if you have an unpleasant experience in the street, you need to call dad, you need to call mom, and we're going to be your advocates. What I tell my son is that if a police officer stops you and you have questions about it, you follow all the directions. And then what you need to do is you go back to the adults in your life and we will be your advocates. I don't want my son at 14 years old trying to advocate for himself with a whole bunch of other teenage boys. That's going to go bad. But if he comes back to me and he tells me this is my experience, we as the adults in these young people's lives need to go and find out what happened and get some answers for our children so that they feel like they have the power, that their voice matters. One of the things I think is so important when we talk to the young people is that if you have an unpleasant interaction, it matters. Your voice matters, and we need to hear about it. So I think we need to say that, and then we need to follow through when they come to us.
Thank you. So use that.
Yeah.
Another thing that we hear, police officers have quotas that they have to meet every single month. So whatever interaction that they go in, one, is it true for a police officer to be able to stay on his job or her job that they have to do specific arrest interaction to show that they did their job? So is there a quota that a police officers have to meet?
Boy, you did your homework on this. You are asking some tough questions. So I will say this, and traditionally in policing, the way we measured like success or a good officer was through numbers. How many citations did you write? How many tickets did you write? How many arrests did you have? But slowly, and I will say again, there's 18,000 police departments that are doing 18,000 different things. And there are some departments like Ferguson, right? They literally relied on motor vehicle citations as revenue for their city. So the police officers had a mandate in that city to go out and really write up their own residents. And that sets the police department against its community. What we have in Cambridge, we do not have quotas. What we do have, though, is we worry about areas that have high accident locations, and we will send officers in areas where there are a number of traffic, whether it's fatalities, accidents, citizens being, hit by cars or crosswalks, and those are where we put our officers. As far as arrests go, arrest is one of our last go-tos. One of the things that we do now, and this is a change from the past. I want to say our arrests from when I first came on in 1995, where we averaged about 3,000 arrests in a year, have now been reduced to about 1,000. Because arrest is not our first reaction, it's one of our last. We're trying to figure out how do we help this person and get them in some sort of services that they may need.
Okay. I'm glad to hear quotas are changing, but in some areas it's definitely scary because some of us think, especially if it's the end of the month, it's going to be a lot of our arrests that's going to come up. Is there, if police officers stops you, and then sometimes could be for good reason and sometimes could be unfortunately because of quota, what is my legal right to be able to say you cannot search my car, or for any reason there is no need for me to be asked to get out of the car? So is there any kind of communication I can ask, or can a police officer just look at my car and then just assume there is some kind of crime or I did something wrong and then my car is going to be searched?
A best practice for me is to, when it comes to being stopped, you ask the officer. For us, we have a policy as far as, a procedure that involves when you get stopped, you are to introduce yourself, tell the person the reason for the stop, and answer any questions that they have. And as long as it's safe to do so. But I think that at the minimum, you're going to ask the officer, why did you stop me? And if he asks to search your car, I think the first answer is no. Do you have a warrant? Why do you want to search my car? So I just want to be careful about, I think you should say no. If they need to get a warrant, let them get a warrant. If they have probable cause, if they believe that your car or you are somehow involved in some other criminal behavior, they should tell you that. And they should explain to you, yes, we have probable cause to believe you're involved in drug activity or whatever it is, and we're going to search your car for whatever it may be, and you don't have a choice. What I would say is do not fight that. Allow them to do what they have to do, and then you file a complaint after, either with the PRAB, Police Review and Advisory Board. If you have to go to the Attorney General's office, whoever you have to go to, report that. If you have questions about how you've been treated, I can't tell people enough how important it is to complain and to say, I was not treated with respect or dignity, and I want to talk to somebody about it. So that would be my advice.
I think, like you said, we have to be cautious. I mean, there's no interaction that's going to lead to something else. So at the end of the day, the goal is for everybody to get home. And I tell anybody that I interact with, I said, do whatever the police officer tells you, get home alive, and then complain if you have to do, because at that moment. Sometimes this question comes up and I don't know. Let's say if police officers follows you, you are, call it in a dark area, not lighted, and you're afraid by just being stopped by the police officer. Can you continue, or is there a place that I can call? I don't know if I could call 911 and said, there's a police officer following me. I'm not trying to evade. Yep. Can I continue to a safe area where it's crowded or lighting or something so that the interaction is not going to be just between myself and police officer?
That is absolutely reasonable. It's interesting. I used to teach a rape aggression defense class for women. And one of the things they asked me is that if I'm alone in my car and there's a car behind me with blue lights on, and I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel safe, what should I do? And it's just what you said. What we asked you to do: put on your blinkers, call 911, tell them where you are, tell them that there's an officer following you. You're not trying to avoid the officer, but you're going to go to a place where you feel safe. And that's going to all be on a recorded line. And I would absolutely don't stop, don't speed away.
Yep.
Put on your flashers, get someplace safe where you know that there's people. I think that's a total reasonable request that we should honor that. So I think you'd be hard pressed to have any officer anywhere say that they didn't understand that.
And then I would not be charged that I took that officer for too long, whatever. So that would not be part of another charge that's going to come up.
I hope not. I think that would be like a low blow. But if you are, that's something I think you can fight in court and would absolutely win that fight.
Okay, so as long as they call, I think that's what I say. Call 911 and try to say you're not trying to evade, you're following, but you're just trying to get to a lighted area, to a safe area, to have that interaction. That's good. Let's talk about promotion. I mean, there's a rank everybody has to go through. For me, as counting and everything else, there is a number that I have to meet, or that have to show that I did A, B, C, D before I get promoted. Is there, as a police officer, in order to get promoted, do you have to have a history? You have been involved in some kind of, call it, violent situation. You have discharged your firearm. You have gone through certain kind of things in order to get the ranking. So is there any kind of numbers in there that shows you have done so many arrests? You have closed so many cases. You have done whatever we want to call criminal activities, drug arrest, violent arrest. You killed or saved someone, you discharge your arm properly. Is there any kind of criteria that it says in there for someone to be promoted that you had to be involved in some kind of, call it, violent activities or criminal situations?
Absolutely not. I will tell you, in my history, I mean, I was not known for arrests. I was not known for citations. I was known for my community outreach and my passion for connecting with the community. And that's really what we're looking for. I think how we promote in Cambridge is really through another civil service exam. And it's about, reading these books, understanding the content in the books. I think Massachusetts tries to do a good job of keeping up with best practices in policing so that the reading material is relevant to what's going on nationally in policing. So it is through an exam, and it could be some assessment center and things like that, but definitely not arrest-based.
Okay, so there is not an incentive. I was involved, I discharged my firearm, I did A, B, C, D in order to get promoted. So those kind of things just warrant whatever situation that they are going through. It's not going to lead them to another. Okay.
Absolutely not. Yeah, that's, yeah. I don't want to say that, if somebody was involved in an incident like that they wouldn't get promoted, but we're not looking for that for somebody to get promoted. And we might look a little extra if you do have a history filled with use of force incidents and discharging firearms and complaints about excessive force. You might have a problem making it up to a command rank.
Okay. One of the questions also is, let's say a police officer did something bad and he was fired or she was fired, let's say from Cambridge Department. Can that police officer move into another city, town, and get hired as a police officer?
So I know that there is some legislation out there that wants to make it so that we can share information about it. And this has been a problem where an officer will get fired in one state and go to another state and get hired. So we need to do a better job. I won't say it's out there nationally where an officer can't move around and get another job, but I think that's part of some legislation that's being pushed now. So I do know that there have been officers who've been fired and then picked up in other police departments, maybe not from the same state, but we are trying to, do a better job at finding out who the bad apples are out there. I don't know if you've read the President Obama's 21st Century Policing Report, but he addresses that in there. And how do we make sure that these bad apples cannot continue on in another police department? And so we have honored all of the 6 pillars in that report. And I think police departments across the country would be hard pressed to go look at that report and implement those suggestions in that report.
Okay. One of the question with this, not only is Black man or colored, is there, because some people with mental illness, it could be white, Hispanic, or anything, they could be mistreated also in this kind of situation. is there a specific training for police officers that happen when it comes on how to deal with mental health citizens, illness?
Yes. And we've been doing a whole bunch. So there's crisis intervention training, which it's pretty much, it's across the country. The gold standard, which we are reaching for, is to train 100% of our personnel in crisis intervention training, where we can recognize when somebody is either, mentally ill, Alzheimer's, it could be, any number, PTSD. So recognizing, what that experience is for a person and how do you effectively de-escalate that. So we're in the process of training all of our officers in that. And another training that we have is trauma-informed police training about how to, deal with people who have been traumatized, how to recognize trauma during an interaction, also how to recognize trauma in yourself, and be able to effectively de-escalate that. So there is a lot of training around mental health, around trauma that's out there in policing, and Cambridge is trying to be on the forefront of those trainings.
Okay, glad to hear that. We're almost approaching the end of our program. One question, with the marching, with that's going on, is there a moment, I know I was talking to you also about this, because of COVID, we're not able to do this, but at some point, trying to organize a march that's going to be able to have the civilians and the police officers come in solidarity and show this is something that the police officers don't tolerate. And we are with you, because at the end of the day, you are the mothers, you are the son, you are the father in the community. Just because you wear the uniform, you're not, just don't come in from alien, from Mars or whatever. So we are part of that society together. How we can work together, how this kind of activities, like I said, it is not deemed to be black or white situation, but we can work together. What kind of thing you see in the future part of this reconciliation and recovery that we have to do?
It's interesting, there's a rally happening here in the city of Cambridge on Sunday with the young people, and the conversations with some of the older people was just that, should the police come? Should the police speak? Should the police kneel? Can the police be part of it? And really what they wanted was the young people to be able to come and feel safe and speak their voice and speak their anger and speak their pain. I think we have to get past, we have to hear people and understand what they're feeling before and really work hard to build that trust. I don't even want to say rebuild, because I don't think we've ever had it, to build that trust with our young people, particularly our young people of color. And we've got a lot of work to do before we can sit there and before they'll stand with us. I think for me, I would love to stand with young people, but they're not ready for me right now. They have to feel their pain. We have to apologize. We have to do things better in the future before they'll trust us enough to walk side by side. I think we have a lot of making up to do. We have a lot of work to do before I think a young people is going to trust us enough to stand side by side with us.
Definitely, I think I'll be part of that to make sure that we're going to have that reconciliation. What there a program for the youth to be involved? I know there are some kind of activities that you just mentioned, the auxiliary program. So if you have to give some advice on how to understand better Cambridge police, or how, as a citizen, how can we get involved?
So for the police, we have our school resource officers who are in every school. How you can get involved, just trying to think about, we have our youth, Cambridge, the Youth Academy, getting involved that way. I think the auxiliary is another great way to get involved. We used to run a citizen police academy, and that's something that maybe we can consider bringing back. The cadet program, I think, for young people is a way for them to at least experience policing, even if they're on the fence about whether or not they would like to be a police officer, to come in as a cadet and to get paid and to see a lot more about what policing is like, and meet some officers, go on a ride along. I think that could go a long way of, kind of breaking down the fear and seeing. I think, one of the things I think is really important is that our community understands that we are human beings. You know, my policing is, this is a job. I love my job. This is important work, but I'm first a mom, and I'm first a woman, and a Black woman, and just being able to understand that I take this uniform off, and you know what I'm saying? I'm not my uniform. I'm so much more than that. And when you can see the police as human beings, and we in turn, I mean, I look at that George Floyd, when he was on that ground, it didn't look like he was not treated as a human being, right? And we need to see each other as human beings and treat each other with that respect and dignity, and that lacked in that whole interaction.
Thank you. I think as a closing statement, you may have answered it already, as that someone says, is race profiling part of the training before they are handed a badge as a police officer?
Yes. I think it's a big part of the training in the police academy. But I still think there is some sort of a block, right? When people are accused of racial profiling, what an officer takes away from that is, you're calling me a racist. But what we need to really hit home is that we all have biases. And by looking, and it's really important for police departments to watch the action of their officers. Who are you arresting? Who are you writing citations to? Who are you writing tickets to? And if we see a pattern of people, you know, stopping young males of color and taking enforcement action, there's a problem there. But it's incumbent, and the officer may not even realize it in his head that he's doing that. But we as a police department need to make sure that we have checks and balances so that we can bring attention to unwanted behavior and stop it before it gets out of control. And we saw it across the country. I think we saw it in the incident in Minneapolis, where that officer had a horrible history. It should have been caught. He should not have been on the street. And now we have, you know, another dead human being, and it's tragic.
What would your message be if they can hear you right now? And like we talked before, there are some police officers who are, call it racist, and end up being in this job, and they're dishonoring the uniform. What message would you send for those who got bypassed? The system did not catch them. The psychological testing did not catch them, and they are still hiding in that uniform. What message would you send for those people?
Right. The message that I would send is that if you're in this job, other than to help people, to provide people, connect people to resources, and provide people with assistance, and to help the most vulnerable, if you're in it for anything other than helping people and bringing out the good in people, then you need to pick a different job.
Thank you. That would be also for me. Again, Christine, with your permission, I'm going to call you Christine. So it's an honor having you in here, and having during this time with the conversation, especially at a difficult time. I know how busy you have been. I really also want to say thank you very much for Jeremy, who was able to help us put together. So Jeremy, if you're listening, I really thank you very much for all the emails, system check that we ended up doing. So I really appreciate that you took the time to do this. And I also want to say a great friend, Adam Pattern, who was able to start this and have worked with Adam for so long, and have a great relationship with Cambridge Police that I have worked very closely year after year through our Massachusetts Ethiopian Association concentration. So I want to say thank you for this time. So before we close, any departing message that we did not touch, that I want to give you the floor. What do you want to say?
What I would say first is I hope I can come back on sometime in the future where we're talking about policing is in a different and a better place. I think secondly, I just want to, reach out to the young people to say, think about becoming a police officer. I think the way I chose to change policing, and I think policing does need to change, is to change it from the inside. I think the answer is not to become a police officer. I think the answer is to become a police officer, and we can show the others about how to police in a more effective, fair, and impartial, dignified way. We need to diversify our police ranks with women, with people of color from all across the world that have come here and that represent this wonderful country. So this is a job. This is a meaningful job where you can really make a difference. And I would love to have you think about it.
Definitely, we will bring you back to talk about in a lighter way, because this is how we build communication. I mean, it just doesn't happen in one day. An hour is not enough to talk about on this topic. We are hurting. I'm hurting. Our community is hurting. The whole America is hurting. And I have seen events all over the world, from France to Australia, everywhere, coming out against this. And my fear is, if there was no video, we would have never talked about George Floyd. So I'm hoping all police officers will be wearing video, and then we're gonna, like I said, I mean, there are like more good police officers than bad. And then for those who are in those uniforms, you are in the wrong field. Please get out, and just let the good police officers do the job, because you are the people, whenever everything else fails, that I call. I pick up that phone for my safety, and I don't want to be afraid of any police officers to come in and save me. So I want to be helping. I want to be part of that solution, and the community want to be part of that solution. So, and this is how it starts. Having Christine with uniform, this uniform should not be a fear. It should be an honor. It should be a place where I feel safe when I see another police officer. I used to be in the Army. I'll always honor that uniform. I'll protect it, and then I'll honor it. It doesn't matter right now that I'm a civilian. So that uniform means a lot to me. So we need to have more discussion. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to have that March once COVID is gone. So once again, Christine, I thank you very much for taking time this late from your family after working long hours to come in. Adam and Jeremy, again, thank you very much. And for our viewers, I thank you very much for following in. We are all in this. We are all hurting. But please, let's not make this a one-time event. We scream about it and we go home. We have to fight the system. We will do it together. Let's do it peacefully. We don't need to have any more stealing or anything that goes around in order to protect things, because we're defeating the purpose of it. So let's try to do it in a peaceful way as much as we can. But I understand the pain, and when people don't have any other place to express it, it might come out the wrong way. So once again, thank you for our viewers. Tomorrow night, I will be bringing a different light program at 8 o'clock. I hope to see. It's going to be on business, on how to build business and how to be in a charity and how to give back. So it's going to be a little bit of a lighter conversation. But today, Floyd, I didn't know you. I'm really sorry that you had to go this way. It's the hardest way. And I hope all those criminals will be charged and justice will be served. We are all with you. Rest in peace, my brother. And thank you for our viewers. Hope to see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And I thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.